Last year was a big year for the Philippines as far as defense and foreign policy was concerned. On one hand, we had President Marcos Jr. deciding to expand the parameters of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement and pushing for even closer security cooperation not only with the United States, but a whole host of partners and allies from all around the world. Australia, Japan, European friends, and also new rising powers like India. At the same time, we saw one of the biggest war games ever between the Philippines and its allies. The Balikatan exercises saw more than 15,000 troops participating, not only from the US and the Philippines, but also we saw participants from Australia, from Japan, and also observers from new rising partners like the United Kingdom. The same year also saw a whole host of joint patrols and joint drills and naval activities between the Philippines and like-minded countries in the South China Sea and beyond. Not to mention a proactive transparency initiative by the Philippine Coast Guard and growing focus on resupplying and fortifying our position in the Ayungin Shoal and other land features under Philippines control in the West Philippine Sea. Nevertheless, we know that the Philippines has a long way to go before developing sufficient military capability in order to properly preserve its sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea and other bodies of waters. Accordingly, the Philippines is pushing for more exercises and closer cooperation with like-minded powers and allies, but also modernization of the Armed Forces of the Philippines capability, particularly with focus on naval and air force capability. In order to better understand the direction of Philippine defense policy and our efforts to strengthen our deterrence capability and overall operational capacity, we're going to have a special guest that should be familiar to a lot of you. We talked to him last year when we had the Balikatan exercises, and now let's discuss what to look forward to in 2024. Joining us tonight is Armed Forces of the Philippines Director, Joint and Combined Training Center, Colonel Mike Logico. I hope I got that right. That was
Yes.
There's so much going on there. So last year when we had our show, Colonel, you joined us with a different title. So what is the difference right now?
Actually, the title of Director JCTC is my normal day title. Okay, that's my official designation. Last time I was here, Balikatan was ongoing.
Right.
So I wore a second hat, which is the executive agent for Exercise Balikatan. Executive agent, I serve as the Chief of Staff of the Exercise Directorate. I am the one, the people put in charge of running things in Balikatan. So my job there is I execute the exercise from the conceptualization to the planning, all the way to execution and the assessment. See, when the exercise is not ongoing, my normal Clark Kent title is the Director of the Joint and Combined Training Center.
Right, so some sort of wearing different hats, something that's quite familiar to a lot of us. Now, first of all, before we talk about the year, because so much happened last year.
Yes, up to a few days ago.
Yeah.
A lot of has happened up to a few days ago.
Exactly. So last year, first you had the decision of the president for the expansion of EDCA. That was one of the big events of last year.
Yes.
But the other big event, of course, was the Balikatan exercises. It's always big, but this was extra large, right?
Yeah.
This time, right? Yeah.
So far, it's still the biggest.
Yeah.
Yes. Up until we do the next one.
More than 15,000 last year, and then you had the United Kingdom also. Was an observer.
We had the Australian Defence Force.
Or Japanese.
The Australian Defence Force. We had a large contingent from the Japanese Self-Defense Force as observers,
right,
over and above the normal observers that we have for the International Observer Program. Okay, this Balikatan, we are going to have, of course, we're going to have the U.S. through the participation of joint elements from U.S. Indo-PACOM. We're also going to have contingent from the Australian Defence Force. For the first time, France is also joining us.
Mm-hmm.
The French
Right.
Navy will also be joining us for certain limited events. Okay, and aside from that, we're also trying to work out the participation of the Japanese Defence Force also. See. And aside from that, we also have the normal contingent of observers who will be coming over just to witness the exercise.
Is it going to be as large as last year or something similar to those
We
numbers?
don't have the
saw?
numbers yet, but the difference between now and last year is that now we are going to be exercising in key positions all over the country.
Right.
So we're going for quality. Aside from quantity, we're also we're heavily leaning towards quality training.
Right. Before we talk about this year, I mean, let's go back to last year. I mean, one of the highlights of last year was President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. himself graced the event, and that's quite something, wasn't it? Right.
Yes, actually, from my experience in Balikatan, this was the first time a president, the commander-in-chief, actually attended one of the events of Balikatan. And I'm glad to say that the exercise itself, which was the Littoral Live Fire, gave the president a good idea of what it will take if we so happen to go to war together in the near future, in the hypothetical future.
Right.
See? So it was a significant development, and we hope to match that in the next Balikatan.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking this is, many could look at last year and say, well, I mean, this was a big year whereby the Marcos administration was signaling that we're going to approach things differently from the previous administration. But obviously, they always say about the Philippines, we're good in, the Big Bang, we're good in those things. But follow through is always the most important part, especially in matters of national security, in matters of preparedness and all. That's the reason why I think many are watching very closely from all around the world. What is going to be the orientation of the Philippines for this year? Are we going to build on what happened last year, or what last year was just kind of a one-off, a signaling event? And what is a more long-term trajectory? But like, how many? Do we have an idea how many joint exercises and activities we're going to have with the Americans? Because historically, it's around more than 200, 300 even sometimes.
Yes. We will build upon the success of the last Balikatan. And actually, that's what we're trying to do. For every Balikatan that we're doing things a little differently, adding some more challenges, some more complexity towards the exercise. The key here is really, as I said in my previous appearance here, we want to get to that level of competency where we can execute our mandate. And because of that, we are tweaking some events in Balikatan. Okay, that also goes from the tactical level all the way up to the operational level.
Right.
Okay. So for now, that's all I can say.
Actually, I wanted to make clear to our audience the reason why we're not giving some of the specifics is for national security reasons. So I appreciate you. So I hope folks, respect the fact that But what can you say, sir?
What I can say is that aside from the kinetic activities, we're also doing non-kinetic activities as well. So what does that mean? The operational environment is composed of both the physical domain and the non-physical domain. So what composes the physical domain? It's our littoral areas, it's our airspace, it's our land ground space. Okay, but the non-physical domains will include cyberspace, information operations, information warfare, the C2 command and control nodes. Right. So those are the things that we are also paying attention to. So just the physical domain and the non-physical domain. We recognize kasi that the non-physical domain will have also a direct impact on the physical domain. Kaya ngayon, it started a few Balikatans ago. Right. Now we are doing cyber defense exercises. We're doing information warfare exercises as well. These things are essential in order for us to approach the operational environment on both fronts, both the physical and the non-physical.
Well, I'm glad that you talk about cyber warfare, and essentially this is the 21st century we're talking about, right? One of the other big things last year, or two rather, was the president visiting the Pentagon, and I understand it was a big event. You had the special treatment given to the president, a lot of discussion on upgrading the guidelines of our alliance. But the other one was, again, one of the first in recent memory, President Marcos Jr. visiting the Indo-PACOM. In Hawaii. So, I mean, I cannot think of any other regional leader, or even U.S. ally for that matter, who has been so front and center. I mean, before we go to the operational implications, how important is it that the head of state of the Philippines, the commander-in-chief himself, is so involved directly, almost being there in the war room with
it's extremely important. It's extremely important because the president also wears a second hat, which is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Philippines. So it's his responsibility to see to it that the defense of the nation is the defense and the security of the nation is well taken care of, well looked after. And his operating arm is the armed forces of the Philippines. Okay. So, as I often explain, I go back to my favorite military theorist, si Carl von Clausewitz. The first and the most important task of every commander, and that means our president, is to understand the operational environment. So he needs all that briefings. He needs all that information for him to understand what's actually happening right now.
Right.
Okay. So if we just look at it from a purely nation perspective, okay, we look at just our interests in the West Philippine Sea. Okay, we are only looking at a small portion of how we fit in at the regional level.
Right.
So he needs those briefings. He needs those engagements coming from the Pentagon, coming from US Indo-PACOM, so that he understands what's going on at the regional level. See, so the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea conflict, okay, that's just one part of it.
Yes, one theater of a bigger one.
Yes, one
yeah.
theater of the bigger. Yeah. So that is where every commander has to start, how to look at it from the bigger picture. So we begin with understanding it comes in two parts. What are the things we already know, which we classify as facts?
Right.
What are the things that we do not know yet? And that is where we put in our assumptions.
Right.
And before you even proceed with that, knowns and unknowns, yes. But before you do that, you have to already make a decision where you will approach this. So for me, for example, I'm in the military. I will naturally approach this from a purely realist perspective. And from a realist perspective, you're talking about everybody in uniform. Okay, you see the situation as a battle between forces in the attainment of ultimate power.
Right.
Okay, but I'm looking at it from a purely realist perspective. The president has that
predisposition, right?
Or that latitude to see things from not only a realist perspective, but also from other perspectives as well, from a liberal perspective, from a constructionist perspective. So may wider latitude siya. However, the president still has to rely on us, the military, to come up with a military solution. So that sort of limits already the things that the military can do.
Right.
Because the expectation of civilian authority on the military, on the AFP, is to focus on military options. You cannot approach you cannot successfully do all of the instruments of national power if you have a weak military option.
Right.
So that's why what we're trying to do through training, education, through exercises, is to strengthen that military option.
You're the big tool in the toolbox, right?
Yes.
Just to give the president options.
Just one of the tools. One of the tools. So that is the value that the AFP has to offer to the country in terms of the options of national options that we can give for the president.
Recently I kind of got into trouble myself. I had a piece on Journal of Democracy about how things are turning very surprisingly, pleasantly surprising, I would say, under President Marcos Jr., particularly in the foreign policy front. And I can see this all around the world. I've been traveling all around the world over the past year, talking to folks from all around the world. And everyone is very pleasantly surprised. I think what is turning out to be the case under President Marcos Jr. is so different from what many were expecting. This guy is going to pick up where Duterte left off in a much more skeptical towards the West position and much more, some would say, overly accommodational towards China. But the thing we're seeing also with President Marcos, which we mentioned a while ago, is how hands-on he is on these issues, personally attending these briefings. If you look at a lot of his pronouncements, this doesn't look like a guy who's just reading from teleprompter or just read 3 bullet points. He seems to have this kind of a more in-depth understanding of the very nuances of the very things we're discussing. I don't want to call him an expert per se, but he seems to be properly briefed at the very minimum. And
that's an important thing.
At the very minimum,
yeah, that's an important thing.
I just want to understand, you folks in the military, how important this is that you see a president right now who is displaying what some see as tremendous amount of strategic maturity, especially in such a challenging moment, and especially what we had behind us not long ago. Yeah.
Well, it boosts our confidence. What we desire in leaders is that confidence in knowing actually where we are right now and which direction we are headed. Kasi that is the function of all leaders. Okay, to take us from point A to point B.
Right.
Okay, and it helps that the leader that we are following knows what he's doing. Yan ang hinahanap eh. Followers want to be led. Okay, but we want to be led by
someone who knows this stuff.
Someone with a radar,
vision,
a clear roadmap on where we're trying to go. And that is actually also our responsibility to inform the commander on the situation as it is developing, to provide the commander options also. Okay. So that is to answer your question. Yeah, it is good that we are looking at some direction, okay,
right?
Some form of direction, and it's also our responsibility to keep the commander informed.
Again, maybe I kind of put you on the spot, but I'm not gonna say sorry for that. No, I just want to hear it because, honestly, I've been talking to folks from military and defense establishments for quite some time, essentially since the West Philippine Sea disputes became the disputes that we're very familiar with. So it cuts across different administration. And, one of the things I noticed is, a lot of people coming on and saying how encouraged they feel with what President Marcos Jr. is doing and how much he's way ahead of what many people were expecting in terms of his familiarity with this issue, him being involved. Are you expecting the president to be also attending, I don't know, the Balikatan also this year, etc.?
Yes.
Is this the hope? Yeah.
Yes, we already set a precedent in last year's Balikatan. So, how are you going to top that? Well, we are going to try to top that in next Balikatan.
Right.
Yeah. Going back to the issue on West Philippine Sea, to fully understand what's happening, we really have to elevate things from the local to the regional level. And I think that is where the briefings that were given to the president are very important.
Yeah.
Kasi we have to begin with this fundamental truth, that any security problem that happens at the regional level will definitely impact us at the nation level. That is something that we have to fully accept and understand. Okay, for reasons that, for example, if we have China, for example, okay, that plays a major part in the way we do things in the military. We also have to understand how China is behaving.
Right.
Okay, if we do not understand what they're doing, it's also very hard for us to execute our concepts. So it begins with that. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and really have
Please
to talk.
Go ahead.
Really have to talk about this. First is our understanding, that China's intentions are already well known to all of us. I mean, they've already articulated it in their literature
and defense papers.
Their goal really, if you understand yung literature nila sa China Dream, and their
Great Rejuvenation.
Rejuvenation, their 100-year marathon, their goal is really to be the regional hegemon. And in order for them to do that, they have to consolidate their island chains. And where do we situate ourselves? We are right there in the middle of the two island chains.
Right.
You see?
So one cutting from East China Sea, all the way to Japan, East China Sea, South China Sea, and then the other one quite behind us in the Western Pacific and the Philippine Sea, all the way to the South Pacific.
It's important that we see.
So we're sandwiched in the middle of these two lines.
We're sandwiched in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are both an obstacle, and at the same time, we are also the focus of their
a prize,
of their
maybe
unrestricted warfare strategy, because of our location. Now, if we understand that, it's also important for us to understand how it will impact us.
Right.
Okay, how is that going to impact us? So it is not exactly correct to say that we have to remain neutral in whatever is happening at the regional level. It's impossible. Because whatever happens at the regional level will definitely impact us. Like for example, if we are going to talk about the conflict, the brewing conflict that is that we are expecting between China and Taiwan, as an example, there are people who say we should not get involved. That is purely their conflict. It does not impact us. But if you try to look at it, try to understand it really carefully, there are implications that will definitely affect us if war does happen. Like for example, if China suddenly changes its if Taiwan suddenly changes its colors and becomes part of China,
Right.
what are the implications there?
Even kind of like a satellite state. Let's say if super pro-China government takes over in the future. Right.
Suddenly, China is only 46 nautical miles away from Avulis.
Yeah.
So we
Which is our northernmost naval base. Yeah.
We will be forced to share a maritime border with China. And right now, we do not actually share a maritime border with China.
Right.
We don't recognize the 9-dash line. And yet we're having these problems. And there's another implication there. Aside from the normal, what we're thinking about, refugee movement, displaced
Well,
people,
200,000 Filipinos in Taiwan alone. Yeah.
They will be displaced. They will be moving towards northern Luzon. There's another implication there. If Taiwan changes colors, then all of the territories of Taiwan will also change its colors.
Yeah.
That includes Ito Aba, which is actually right dead center in our Calayan Island groups.
Right. So it also puts pressure on us in the West Philippine Sea, not
Yes.
only towards
It will
Bashi
absolutely
Channel.
it will absolutely alter the security landscape. So understanding that there are implications that will affect us no matter what happens. See, that means that it is also important for us to make certain decisions on whether we encourage it to happen or we do whatever we can to prevent it from happening.
Right. To play a more active role, I mean, I always say, geopolitics 101, geography shapes national security consideration.
Yes.
So the idea of a China leaning or completely China led, Beijing, People's Republic of China led government right off the, maritime borders of the Philippines. I'm from Ilocos, so every time we go towards the north, I can hear Taiwanese radio, right? When we're in Pagudput area, for instance, right?
Yes.
You can really feel how close Taiwan is. That's geography for you. So, and I always say, like, Manila is closer to Taipei than any major ASEAN capital. Just over an hour, you're in Taipei.
Yes,
from Manila,
absolutely.
right, while it takes you 3-4 hours to go to Singapore, Malaysia,
Yes,
and all. But the other one I want to emphasize also here, currently, is we are a U.S. treaty ally. And U.S. has its own obligations to Taiwan. And another country very close to us, like Japan, is having the situation that we have with Taiwan from the north to the south, right? They're extremely close. So you look at Okinawa and some of their islands.
Actually,
So
the
we cannot be neutral,
yeah,
right?
the distance alone means that we are sharing the same battle space.
Right.
Okay. So if things get kinetic, for example, there are certain operational conditions that must be met before things escalate. That means China must have maritime and air dominance at the Bashi Channel for it to happen. For it to happen, that is their requirement. Because they cannot execute something if that condition does not exist. So we have to look at these indicators, and that is why our focus right now is really to go out there, to operate beyond the littorals.
Right.
See, that means in terms of our capability, we focus now on maritime and air capabilities.
Sure.
To include our capabilities at the littorals. That is going to be the direction that the AFP is heading for as we are transitioning away from internal security operations to external defense.
One of the concerns I hear is that Chinese submarines may be all over the place. Actually, they are all over the place, but you need domain awareness capability. You need some sort of technology to know what on earth is happening, even in a non-war situation, in a cold peace, let's call it that way, in a cold peace situation like what we have in the Bashi Channel and the cross straits. How important is our cooperation with our allies in terms of developing the domain awareness? Because everyone's talking the West Philippine Sea, but
Yes.
my God, so much is going on in the Philippine Sea, so much is going on in the Bashi Channel, Luzon
Yeah.
Strait. You need a lot of assets and equipment
Ako,
to know
I
what's
will
going
look at
on.
that as just one entire
Integrated theater.
theater of operation.
Right,
Okay,
right,
it's
right.
one battle space.
Yeah.
And it's important also that to understand the limitations of our capabilities and how our treaty allies can actually help us fill in those gaps.
Right.
So right now, we are not only doing exercises with our traditional treaty allies. See, we are also doing exercises with the Australian Defense Force.
Right.
So, and very soon, you will see the involvement of the French Navy.
Yeah.
And if you've been looking at the news, there's also efforts to bring in the UK and also the
Eventually
GSDF.
India even, right? With the BrahMos missile deal.
Yes,
right?
well,
That's
the BrahMos
big.
through the material development that we are
Yeah.
gaining from India. You see, so we recognize that in order for us to deal with the broader security issues here, we also have to leverage on our allies and like-minded partners.
Right. Now a little bit fast forward. So we kind of emphasize that indeed there's some gaps there that we have to fill up, and that we're not blind to the existing threats as they're happening right now. Now, speaking of the situation in Taiwan, I think we made it pretty clear. I think we both agree that given the geography and given the alliance networks and obligations, I mean, we cannot be neutral when, let's say, there's war and Americans are dying just a few miles away from us, right? I mean, allies cannot be neutral in moments of war. I mean, that's my understanding, right? And the Chinese are not going to see us as neutral. Automatically, they're going to assume we're going to be U.S. ally. My point here is, to what degree do you think the Philippines, well, this is a policy question. I don't want to put you in trouble.
It's a policy question.
Yeah, I know it's a policy question. Okay, let me say it on my thing is, I think the big question for the Philippines right now is to what degree, what is the Goldilocks level of involvement that the Philippines can have in preventing China from even thinking of invading Taiwan? Because I always say, the rhetoric we see from certain camps is, oh, Taiwan should make sure they don't become Ukraine 2.0. I always say, well, China also has to make sure they don't become Putin 2.0, right? And if there's significant collective deterrence, integrated deterrence by Japan, Philippines, Australia, US on the Taiwan question, then China may not even, entertain the temptation of doing something kinetic against Taiwan.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, maybe that's also a big dilemma facing us, right? Yeah.
All our efforts here are geared towards deterrence.
Right.
Okay, to send a message. Actually, everything that we're doing, what nations are doing through exercises, through both kinetic and non-kinetic action, it's like a language
Right.
that we use to communicate also with nations. And exercises by themselves, it sends a message, and the message that we want to send is that we are discouraging you, okay, from taking from entertaining any ideas that you might have that will
Right.
affect our security. You see, so and by deterrence, there are two factors involved there. We have to show our capability. We have to demonstrate our capability, and we have to demonstrate also our resolve.
Right.
So those are two things. I mean, you have the resolve, you don't have the capability.
Right.
Not much of a big
Hindi
message.
pwede puso lang, burong puso lang.
Yeah.
That may discard
So you have to show
capacity, yeah.
both. You have
Yeah.
to show the capability and the resolve.
Right.
Your willingness to employ them.
Right.
You see, the idea here is not to actually use them, but to show the damage that you're going to inflict on the adversary if they do decide to push through with their plans. So that's the main essence of deterrence. You see, so
Of effective deterrence, right? Yeah.
your adversary has to respect that. Okay, your adversary right now, they respect strength.
Right.
They respect that resolve.
Right.
So you have to demonstrate both.
Right. Not just, being nice diplomatically and all of that. This is a serious situation of geopolitical competition in our part of the world. Now, we talked about, a single integrated battle space. And I think this is something that people don't appreciate, that because my understanding is a big reason why China is so aggressive towards the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea right now cannot be separated from their concerns with what's happening in other sub-theaters, like what's happening to the north of the Philippines. I mean, because if you look at it, Vietnam has been militarizing their facilities in the Spratlys. The Malaysians in 2019, 2020 pushed ahead with unilateral exploration of resources. This is by Petronas Vescapella, even if it pissed off both the Vietnamese and the Chinese. But we never saw the Chinese do to them what they're doing to us now, which is this water cannoning and this very aggressive interventions. And my sense is a part of this is because they're worried that the Philippines might go on a steamroller of fortifying cooperation with the US and other countries in other areas that are also concerned with China, primarily Taiwan, but also potentially Western Pacific and those areas. How much of a challenge is this to the again, I'm not going to push you to make a policy intervention here, but how much of a challenge this is in terms of, we cannot have everything on every sub-theater 100% of the time. Sometimes we have to make certain trade-offs or something like that.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. What is your take on this? Yeah.
The way we understand dime is also very different from the way China understands dime.
Right.
Okay. Again, I will have to go back to my favorite military theorist, Carl von Clausewitz. When Carl von Clausewitz says that war is an extension of politics
by other means.
Other means. For China, they will understand it like this. Politics is an extension of war, which is an extension of politics. So they see no difference between diplomacy, war, information, intelligence,
a full statecraft.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a statecraft. Yeah.
All of that is all of those instruments are being used to achieve strategic aims, which is actually how we should understand it. Because when we say dime, people like to compartmentalize.
Right.
Okay.
True. Yeah.
Diplomacy operates at a different wavelength from the military, a different wavelength from informational and economic.
Right.
For China, okay, if they decide to trade with you, it is to achieve a strategic advantage. Looking at it from a purely realist perspective. If they are engaging with you diplomatically, it is in order to gain a political advantage.
Yeah.
You see? Unfortunately for us, or for most countries in the West, we tend to compartmentalize between diplomacy, economy, informational.
Which China encourages, right? China says, we can separate areas of difference from areas of core. They play into that, don't they? They
because
manipulate
that's
us.
the way we are also taught.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way we are also taught. You see, but if we want to succeed, okay, if we want to survive, we have to see things very much the same way as the way China treats dime, which is to keep all instruments of national power towards a certain
Goal,
theme or towards a certain goal, and not have them go separate directions.
Right.
So when we're looking at this situation, and when China sees things as a very distinct, seamless effort between their economic power, informational, diplomatic power, and we are still operating on a different wavelengths for different instruments of national power, then they will always have the advantage over us. So it's important that all of these instruments have to work together.
Which is something, of course, also applies in the maritime zone. I mean, we have like White Hull, Grey Hull, but the Chinese put it's people's war for them, right? The militia, the Navy, all of them cooperate. I mean, even bureaucratically now, the PLA Navy oversees their Coast Guard, and Coast Guard helps their militia. While we would say, this is a White Hull Coast Guard law enforcement issue, this is a Grey Hull military issue. So what you're saying is that compartmentalization is somehow self-defeating. When you're dealing with a country that has this integrated statecraft of seeing war as an extension of politics and politics as an extension of that war, that kind of a dialectical, circular approach.
And I think this is where we have to come up with a collective understanding of who actually we're dealing with. So we take a look at we try to review again our assumptions, and a lot of these gaps that we are looking at are products of false assumptions. Or should I say, we cannot just assume that China behaves the way we do.
Right. Or we
Okay.
want it to do.
Yes, because there's a certain logical fallacy somewhere there. Na
Right.
we are assuming we are
projecting
ourselves that they probably think the way we do. A better way of understanding it is if we have thought through the different scenarios. The assumption is China has also thought through the scenarios themselves.
Sure.
Okay, but they are thinking through the scenarios using a very different perspective, a perspective that we are not actually practicing.
Right. Before we go to the final important part of this episode, because I want to talk a bit about modernization and all, again, to the degree that you can give us details without undermining your national security needs. We talked about China a lot in the past 10-15 minutes. Is it because China is the external security threat to the Philippines? Are we comfortable to openly say that? Is this how we see it in the Philippines as far as the defense establishment is concerned? Or should you concern about other state and non-state actors as far as major security threats are concerned? I mean, to what degree is our national security defense policy really, I would say, shaped by our concerns with China?
Well, I would like to say China is China.
Right. They're just so big and important and threatening in certain ways, I would say.
Well, I would say that China exists as in order for us to provide, it exists to provide an alternative to the Western world.
A whole new order.
At least at the regional level.
Regional level, yeah.
Okay. So naturally, that alone, that the presence of an alternative to somehow create a bipolar world, at least at the regional level, is a cause of concern for a country like us, who are directly affected by their strategic end
as
state.
a U.S. treaty ally also.
As a U.S. treaty ally, and because of our geographic location, situated between the two island chains.
Which China wants to dominate as a kind of a natural expression of its dominance in this part of the world, its vision for this part of the world.
Yes. So naturally, that alone is a cause for concern, at least at the security level.
Yeah.
Okay. And because we are thinking of it just as a purely security matter, we are sometimes apt to compartmentalize between what is security, what is economics, what is diplomacy.
But they don't see it that way.
They don't see it that way.
It's all part of the same statecraft.
It's all part of the same seamless effort in order for them to achieve their strategic end state, which is to be the regional hegemon by the end of their 100-year marathon.
Right. Well, just to be clear, the 100-year marathon is a kind of a Republican American perspective. Some would not agree with it, but again, it's one perspective that by 2049 or something,
2049,
they want to be a kind of really the dominant force, with the modern military, which means more or less at the same level as America. Let's go to the last part of this discussion. I mean, last year, when we met and on the eve of the Balikatan exercises and all, we talked about how far the armed forces of the Philippines has come throughout the years. I mean, we were the leading nation in the 50s and 60s, at least relatively speaking, by ASEAN standards. Then you had, decades of conflict and insurgency and all. And gladly, slowly, we're moving in the right direction on the Bangsamoro question, dealing with terrorist groups, dealing with even communist insurgency. We had the National Security Council folks also here on our show. How far have we come? Again, without giving details, and how far we want to go as we move to the Horizon 3 of AFP modernization.
Yes, I think we've come a long way. The direction of the AFP leadership right now is to hasten the conclusion of our internal security efforts. And the reason to do that, the additional incentive for us to do that is so that we can focus the rest of our time on external defense or territorial defense operations. You see, the longer we stay or the longer we are involved in internal security, is less time that we have to develop our capabilities, our resources, our training and education for external defense.
Right.
Okay, there are some detrimental effects. After 40 40, 50 years,
half a century almost.
half a century of counterinsurgency. There was once a study that was made on what are the effects of these types of operations on the military.
Corrosive effects, I suppose. Yeah.
When a military, naturally, kasi when you're talking about internal security operations, the military takes more than its share of its mandate. Okay, you have the military involved in peace operations. You have the military involved in other areas of governance.
Right.
Okay, so there are three effects. The first effect is that the military performing other functions provides a disincentive for other agencies to do their job.
Right.
Yeah,
moral hazard.
Yeah.
Moral
I mean,
hazard,
why do I have to build classrooms if the military is building classrooms? Right? Okay. The second effect is that it exposes the military to corruption, okay, that exists already in that area of governance.
Right.
Like, for example, in Mexico, the Mexican army is involved in drug enforcement.
Right.
Okay, it exposes them already
Right.
to that type of corruption that already exists in that area. And the third effect is that it reduces the core competency of the armed
Mission
forces.
creep. Yeah.
Eventually, our soldiers will forget how to rush up a hill. A simple thing, because it's too busy doing other things.
Right.
In other areas of governance that other agencies should have the lead role. Okay. So that is going to be the long-term effect if an armed forces is involved in other areas of governance. And nowhere else will you see that type of involvement other than internal security operations.
Yeah.
You see? So when we do transition, we will be getting rid of those things that I've mentioned. And we can actually help the AFP focus on our training, our equipping, modernization, developing capabilities that are needed for external defense.
I mean, realistically, what are we looking at here in the Philippines? I mean, in terms of, we're learning a lot of lessons as we stand here. There are conflicts in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, in the Caucasus region, usage of hybrid warfare, drones, there's so much material out there, so much data to analyze. How is this affecting, AFP's vision of what modernization means in the 21st century, right? It's just not getting more tanks and aircrafts, right? It's also operating in cyber warfare.
Not only that, it's also upgrading this hardware.
Exactly, software,
The thing is, the effect kasi of insurgency on the armed forces is that insurgency itself is a very tactical game.
Right.
Okay. It involves movements of small units, platoons, tactical skills at the individual level.
Right.
External defense is a little bit higher than that. Kasi now you're involved with larger formations, more complications when it comes to planning.
Strategic planning.
Yes. It's like you're trying to steer a bigger boat.
Yeah.
You see? So for all of these years that we've been involved in internal security, we kept our skills at the tactical level.
Right.
What we're trying to do right now, as we are modernizing, as we are procuring modern equipment.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of yung equipment for fire, for maneuver, for C2, we also have to upgrade our people in terms of their education, elevate them from the out of the tactical up to the operational level of war, because this type of fighting, especially when you're dealing with joint forces, joint capabilities, they need certain skills that are at the tactical level are no longer sufficient.
Right.
You see, so it's not just the acquisition of equipment; it's also knowing how to use them.
Right.
The limitations of these equipments and where do the other capabilities of the other service components fit in.
And last point, one of the things that came up in a lot of our interviews is, the Philippines not only becoming much more modern in terms of its equipment and mindset, but the Philippines also embracing a much more middle power mindset, right? Because we're not a small country, right? We're not a small, but we're a country of more than 100 million people. Our GDP is going to soon be among the 20 or 25 biggest in the world. So are we eventually looking at, in the medium term at least, the Philippines becoming a kind of an agile, dynamic, middle power nation, right? That can have, I don't know, a little bit of green water capability in terms of its navy. So not just deterrence, not just, I don't know, being a poison shrimp or a porcupine, but a little bit more than that, right? Because I remember we used to keep on talking about minimum credible defense posture. I'm not hearing the minimum part anymore.
You're not hearing
exactly.
it anymore?
Is it because we want to go beyond something?
Yeah, I've taken that word out of my briefings.
Exactly. I don't hear that anymore. Exactly.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Credible is credible.
Credible is credible.
Yeah, credible is credible. You're not anymore talking about minimum here.
Right.
It's either it's effective or ineffective. See.
But isn't it also about setting the bar a bit higher for the Philippines, of not saying,
yes, of course,
just being a poison shrimp, like just don't attack me because I can hurt you, but more than that, I'm
yes,
really
of course,
not
because
much.
the battlefield is also evolving. There are certain developments that you are going to see in the next couple of years, and maybe in the next decade. Right now, what we're looking at, are the effects of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
You see, and that alone is already a game changer.
Autonomous weapon systems.
Autonomous weapon systems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now we're not anymore talking about the human element.
Right.
If you watch the movie War Game,
right,
way back in 1983,
right,
they've already said that the fault in our system is really the human element.
Yeah.
And what if you took the human element out? Okay, so it's naturally necessary for us to keep on looking over the horizon, taking a look at what's beyond that. Okay, in order for us not only to prevent it, but to anticipate what's really going to happen beyond that horizon, because that's coming to us whether we like it or not. And normally it's the failure for us to understand how it will affect us at year zero that's going to be the death of us. So we have to anticipate that. So when you're saying that, yeah, we're not really satisfied with the minimum.
Yeah.
With the minimum, you have to upgrade every so often to keep yourselves abreast. Movement is life. That's what we say, when it comes to operations. Stagnation is death.
Yeah. It's like bicycle. You stop, pedaling, and then you're gonna fall. Yeah.
While you're still keeping still, you imagine that your adversary is already maneuvering against you. Every second that you waste, your adversary is already maneuvering against you. So we have to keep ourselves, educate ourselves. We have to keep ourselves abreast with these things. And I think that the effect of insurgency on the armed forces, that it kept us stagnant for a very long time.
Right.
Yes, we developed certain experiences at a tactical level, you see, but that will not be enough if you want to elevate ourselves into a world-class armed forces.
Right. So that's what we're really looking for, being a world-class armed forces in the 21st century. Yes. On that note, thank you very much, Colonel Mike Loigo. As always, it was a pleasure, and I appreciate this because I think people have to understand, this is not, the same Philippines that, a lot of people used to not fully appreciate back in the 20th century. This is a new century, new opportunity, and we're embracing our new challenges with also new opportunities. Thank you very much, sir, for that.
Thank you, Richard.
Pleasure
it's been
as
a pleasure.
Always. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcast. I'm Richard Haydarian, and that was The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.